When I learned that Henry Thoreau came to New Bedford, I wondered what the author had to say about the number one industry in New Bedford at that time, which was commercial whaling. These are fishing vessels in the port of New Bedford today, on the Acushnet River, and the same was true in Henry Thoreau's time. The port of New Bedford was dedicated to vessels for commercial whaling, and instead of many fishing boats, you would have seen many whaling vessels. What did the author have to say about commercial whaling at that time? It is the year 1854, it's December, the day after what is today Christmas. Henry Thoreau arrives in the city of New Bedford by invitation to give a lecture. Thoreau scholars know that Henry Thoreau gave as many as 75 lectures during his writing career, and on this occasion Henry Thoreau would speak about the topic was something like life misspent, and he spoke to the Lyceum audience, which was a community of persons interested in learning ideas and hearing ideas. Let's walk up the heart of city of New Bedford, Johnny Cake Hill, and I'll read the opening text of the lecture. At a Lyceum not long since, I felt that the lecturer had chosen a theme too foreign to himself, and so failed to interest me as much as he might have done. He described things not in or near to his heart, but toward his extremities. There was, in this sense, no truly central or centralizing thought in the lecture. I would have had him deal with his privatist experience, as the poet does. And then the author goes on to write, "So now I would say something similar to you. Since you are my audience, and I have not been much of a traveler, I will not talk about people 1,000 miles off, but come as near home as I can. As the time is short, I will leave out all the flattery and retain all the criticism. Let us consider the way in which we spend our lives." Here before us is the Seamen's Bethel, a historic church in the city of New Bedford. In the building behind me is the New Bedford Whaling Museum, and that's where today the modern Lyceum takes place a couple times a year. Let's walk to the location of the Lyceum where Henry Thoreau spoke 150 years ago. The cobblestone streets of downtown New Bedford are a real great part of the life here. Slows everything down, the cars rattle. They presumably were rattling in Henry Thoreau's day. We know that Henry Thoreau's lecture wasn't well received. According to a few reports, he wasn't understood, and that includes Henry Thoreau. He felt that they didn't understand him, but he had spent a lot of time preparing the lecture in the months beforehand, and of course, having successfully published Walden, he must have been at the high point of his writing and outlook on life. Across the street here is the old counting house, which may have been in existence at the time of Henry Thoreau's visit. A careful review of the text of the lecture, known today as the essay Life Without Principle, reveals that Henry Thoreau didn't say anything about whaling, doesn't say anything about whaling in the lecture. That's surprising. Henry Thoreau says at the opening, I'm going to come as near to home as possible. And at that time, whaling, the industries of whaling were part of almost everyone's life in New Bedford. But Henry Thoreau does talk about themes in the area of whaling. He talks about work. Certainly, work is an important way in which we spend our lives. And at that time, it was a common belief that to be a good person, you should work hard. Good people work hard, and that means perhaps manual labor. In the lecture, Henry Thoreau thinks that proposes that we also do the work that we love to do, and we ought to hire people for the work they love to do. That's a really unique argument in literature and in philosophy, and I think it must have spoken to the people present, the captains and owners of the whaling industry. Approaching us is what is now a bank, or a bank for sale, and on this bank is a little placard saying here's the site of Liberty Hall, which was the building where Henry Thoreau gave his lecture. It says, on this site, the former meeting house of the first Congregational and Unitarian Societies was erected. These buildings were converted into Liberty Hall in 1839, and this hall was burnt in 1854, which is the same year that Henry Thoreau came to New Bedford. So at the time of his visit, there was a fire, and there was a fragment of the building. I'm standing in front of the New Bedford Public Library. Here's the stoa of the New Bedford Library. In ancient Athens, the stoa is where the philosophers would gather and hold philosophical conversations. Let's go up to the stoa. And this, of course, is our library, and this building was built about the time that Henry Thoreau came to New Bedford. This is the impressive door. This is the door which is not used in the library. And this library, or this platform, looks out on what is called Pleasant Street. And Henry Thoreau, his famous work, Walden, everyone knows. It was published in August of 1854, and one of the first persons who responded to this great work was a New Bedford citizen, a Mr. Ricketson. Mr. Ricketson was familiar with the community of intellectuals in Concord, and he was also a descendant of a whaling family, a prominent whaling family. He claims in a letter to Henry Thoreau shortly after Walden was published that he read Walden within a couple of days. Hard to believe that a person might have done that. They remained friends for the rest of Henry Thoreau's life, and Henry Thoreau came to the city of New Bedford and across the way to Fairhaven 5 or 6 times during his life, mostly to see what birds had migrated into the area, and to take walks with Daniel Ricketson and his family. Here's Henry Thoreau speaking before the owners of whaling in New Bedford. It is remarkable that there are few men so well employed, so much to their minds, but that a little money or fame would commonly buy them off from their present pursuit. I see advertisements for active young men, as if activity were the whole of a young men's capital. Then Thoreau goes on to say, no, I'm not without employment at this stage of the voyage. To tell the truth, I saw an advertisement of able-bodied seamen when I was a boy sauntering in my native port, and as soon as I came of age, I embarked. We're walking up now Union Street, which is one of the central streets in New Bedford. There is one place in all of Henry Thoreau's writings where he clearly writes about whaling, and that is in Maine Woods. In Maine Woods, surprisingly, Henry Thoreau has to go to Maine to talk about whaling. There he's talking about the white pine tree, and he refers to the elephant, and he refers to the whale, and he says, we today count the weight of the bones that are collected from whales, and we count the amount of blubber that can be melted in try-pots to produce barrels of oil, but we don't know the true value of the whale, says Henry Thoreau. There is a true value to the whale, and that's to see its flourishing, says the 19th century author. Historic Water Street beside the Whaling Museum. So in short, Henry Thoreau did not say anything about whaling while he was in New Bedford. There are some references to whaling, and it's evident that the author had criticisms, objections to commercial whaling, among many other industries. But at the same time, the author did not believe in criticizing the work that people choose to do. So, unlike many activists, Henry Thoreau, somebody who was fair-minded and wanted to convince people rather than to alienate people. That's my conclusion, at least. Henry Thoreau writing, "The aim of the laborer should be not to get his living, to get a good job, but to perform well a certain work." He then goes on to say, "Do not hire a man who does your work for money, but him who does it for love of it."